And my first guest today is the great, I do want to highlight that with a bright yellow highlighter, the great Erwin Hofman. How are you doing, sir?
Very good, actually.
Awesome. Actually,
Yeah, not Shawn. Yeah.
okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that. But first of all, I do want to thank you for your time today, as usual, and especially because it is sort of dinner time in the Netherlands, which is where you're at right now.
Yeah, all the way from the Netherlands. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I'm really glad that you could join us. And what I'm going to do right now, essentially, is as I like to say during speedy streams, I'm going to hand over the keys, let you drive this amazing car, and I'll let you go do it.
I'm a performance consultant on a daily basis. I'm also involved with a RUMvision, where we use Google's own Web Vitals library, Google's maintained Web Vitals library. And that's basically what I wanted to talk about when I run into here and there, for example. So yeah, maybe we can start with some mistakes, although I think, but I might be mixed up. I think it was Paul Colfano who did a talk at Performance Now, but also a LinkedIn post discussing a lot of mistakes, for example. And after he posted on LinkedIn, I reached out as well with an at import example. I hope some of us might recognize the so-called at import in style sheets, and especially when that style sheet is a random blocking style sheet, it typically is then requesting yet another style sheet that the browser could not discover beforehand in time. So you'll then end up with a massive random blocking duration because of that at import rule at the start of your style sheet. And that's typically used by a typekit in particular. I also sometimes see Laravel websites using it, for example, because no one knows about the downfalls, the downsides of using at import, but it's specifically typekit that is using this. We did research on that, and I then ended up writing a blog post on the yearly performance web performance calendar by Stoyan. And even today, I guess we all, as performance consultants, we all think that we wrote about it before, and everyone knows about those downfalls by now, what they should not be doing when it comes to site speed, etc. But even today, we will see the same mistakes happening in websites that are launched, like yesterday, for example, even freshly launched websites, which is quite a shame, but I guess it keeps people like performance consultants off the street. And I do want to share, let's try and do that. So let's switch. All right. So these are, for example, the results of unique page hits, because once a typekit CSS file is cached, then the bottleneck is not as big anymore. But for first-time visitors where the first style sheet, but also the import style sheet is not cached, they will feel the pain from such a construction way more. And we got rid of it on a specific website where they were still using it very recently. We got rid of it in, I think, somewhere end of November. And this is, for example, the win from removing typekit. And we also did a bit of other work as well. For example, we restructured the head section of the source code, something that Harry Roberts has often talked about before. We also code splitted CSS files, which makes sense after removing the typekit at import. But these are some very awesome results already, just mainly by getting rid of an at import construction. And this is the impact on, I should say this is the resource load delay. So when was the image detected? And we saw a massive win over there as well. 41% win just by getting rid of the at import from typekit, which also makes sense because now the browser is able to detect the image way sooner than before. And the percentile chart, for example, is also proving the blue line is recent data, while the gray line is data before. And this percentile chart is basically saying all users are benefiting from getting rid of the at typekit construction, at import construction. The same applies to FCP delta as well. I typically like to look at the FCP time first byte delta, because if I would just look at SCP, including time first byte, then time first byte could result in fluctuations. So our FCP data might fluctuate as well. And then our conclusions might not be as strong, for example, or as illustrating. So I typically really like to look at the subparts of a metric, which I would say is another big thank you to Google introducing, and maybe other people working at it as well, but introducing the subparts of each metric, because that really allows us to dive into, well, if we're working on images, for example, improving discoverability of images or moving from JPEG to WebP, etc. Yeah, you could look at overall LCP, but many other things could be happening, fluctuating, skewing our data. So it's then very, very convenient that we are able to dive into the subparts of a metric. Another talking about, well, things that you should not do. I had a recent case where, and some performance consultants might recognize the situation where I came up with recommendations. And they also asked me, okay, should we move to Cloudflare? I did not see a reason to not move to Cloudflare. So they moved to Cloudflare. And without me knowing, they started to enable a Rocket Loader, for example. I think they already deprecated Mirage.js, so Cloudflare's lazy loading solution. But Rocket Loader is still there, and it could still come with a win. But I would say nowadays there are better ways of improving your SCP, LCP. And yeah, they ended up enabling features that they should not have been enabling at that moment, or as a matter of fact, not at all. So that's, yeah, challenges that we, I guess, get to deal with as well, where we come up with recommendations and people sometimes mix that with their own knowledge and might implement things that are counterproductive, or enable features that a CDN is offering, or installing plugins which were not part of your recommendations, for example. So yeah, those can be challenges as well. But luckily, as I said before, Mirage.js was deprecated already. And another one, although I know they are working on this. I also a sports brand with a web shop in South Africa, for example, where they were using Yoda's Rapid.js, and I hope Shawn is able to talk about that a bit later as well. Where it was using XHTTP request, which was not async. So as a result, it was massively blocking the FTP, for example, which is, I would say, quite painful when dealing with an audience that typically already comes with challenges when it comes to internet speed, connectivity, etc. And I'm now mainly talking about things happening in the head section, but I also often notice that that's already where big wins are to be made already. Again, like Harry Roberts often talks about as well. I typically start my projects in the head section. I will just look at the order of the head section. If there are no unfortunate blocking scripts after a style sheet, for example, which is something that a lot of developers don't know about as well, that it can be counterproductive or regress things more than needed. So yeah, focusing on the head section is one of the first things that I will start with, depending obviously on what the main challenges are, because if the biggest challenge of a website is time first byte, then I will start there. But otherwise I will move on to what's happening in the head section, what can we optimize over there, should we do code splitting, etc. I still run into websites that are running on HTTP1. And if I try to ask why, then they don't even have an answer for that sometimes. I do sometimes hear that it's difficult to switch to HTTP2. I'm not sure why. But in other cases where I ask them to move to HTTP2, then they are able to do that within an hour. And then I'm wondering, okay, why did no one notice this before? Why did no one make that switch before if it was that easy, for example? Another recent case that I had was it was not specifically a betting website, but a live odds website. Where they moved from WordPress, and they used Typekit as well beforehand. They then moved from WordPress to Next.js. So my expectation was that the time first byte would improve while using client-side rendering and SPA on Next.js, while maybe IMP would regress. But unexpectedly, for me at least, it was the other way around. So IMP was fairly healthy, even green, 180 milliseconds, while time first byte regressed big time. And that's quite unfortunate because it was telling me, so that decision was made without any involvement from my end. They already planned to do that switch when they contacted me, when they reached out. And it gave me the idea that they didn't really do any homework before as to what their expected time first byte would become, for example. Well, in the end, they ended up moving to Next.js using client-side render or hydration on top of Next.js. And they were really focusing on SEO. So that's also one of the things people might reach out for. Some might reach out because they just want to improve their Google Web Vitals from an SEO perspective. Others might reach out because they want to improve user experience, conversions, etc. In their case, it was a live ads website, so it was mostly affiliate income from affiliate, etc. And others might reach out because they want both better SEO and better user experience as well, and better conversion. But in this case, they were really focusing on SEO, and they were failing SEO because of CLS. IMP was, well, as I said, nowadays 180 milliseconds. And LZP could not be saved because time first byte was already around 2.5, 3 seconds. And we did make a choice together to switch from soft navigations to hard navigations. And it felt a little bit wrong because Next.js is in the end from origin an SPA-like solution. Although nowadays they also offer, luckily, out of the box server-side rendering as well. And we did switch to hard navigations instead of soft navigations, and it in fact did improve their not time first byte and not LCP, but it did improve their IAP a little bit, but especially CLS, for example. But I did have to elaborate why that was. That's because, well, Google Web Vitals and Google Chrome doesn't really know when a new navigation happens when talking about soft navigations. So first of all, Google Web Vitals data will be attributed might be attributed in an incorrect way in your Google Search Console data, for example. And a new LCP won't be registered within the same page life cycle. So I did talk about those nuances, and I also talked about the fact that the Google Chromium team is working currently in beta or origin trial mode, the soft navigations API. But I also had to share that it might still take maybe 1, 2, maybe even 3 years before that would land in the Google Web Vitals world. So it might already land in Google Chrome at the end of next year. I don't know. But it might take a bit longer before Google Web Vitals is using that methodology as well. And they said, no, we really want to pass Google Web Vitals, so let's then switch to hard navigations. So we ended up doing that. Some metrics, some subparts of LCP as well, for example, benefited from that. And that was, again, one of the strong points of Google Web Vitals and the Web Vitals library that everyone can use. That is able to give you a breakdown of subparts as well. Another typical example is the use of pre-connects. I think someone maybe wrote about that fairly recently as well, aside from me. I'm not sure where it was, but nevertheless, it's still, I think even on Spotify, I checked Spotify today because someone said that Spotify was still using Google Optimize, and I was quite surprised. And there is, in fact, a link to Google Optimize in their source code. But then I also spotted over there some pre-connects using cross-origin, where it should not have been used, for example. And that's not a standalone example. Even WP, so WordPress Rocket plugin, was doing that as well. So everyone using and installing a WP Rapid module ended up with pre-connects out of the box, which is a big advantage of using plugins. But in their case, WP Rocket module was adding cross-origin attributes to every pre-connect. And as a result, well, the domain lookup is being shared, but the TCP handshake part, for example, is then not being shared once an actual file needs to be downloaded, an actual resources needs to be downloaded from that host name. So I started noticing that on multiple WordPress sites and WooCommerce sites, and that was when I figured, okay, this is really coming from WP Rocket itself. Let's check their release notes, and that's where I saw that they ended up, doing this deliberately, and that's when I started to create an issue over at their GitHub repository, and it's been fixed since a month, so that's quite cool. It's also quite cool how I don't even develop in WordPress. I do audits on WordPress, but I don't do any development when it comes to WordPress. But it's quite cool how you still get to contribute, I guess, to the web in that way.
I guess you're going to see eventually your name on the some kind of WordPress Hall of Fame, they have some kind of wall in there where you could actually.
Oh, okay. I didn't know. All right.
It
Well, in
might
that
be.
case,
It might be on the WP Rocket side, but who knows? You talked about some clients hitting you up, and how often, in your estimation, do they specifically ask to improve their core web vitals?
well, at least way more since before Core Web Vitals was introduced. So again, that's the big benefit of Google coming up with Core Web Vitals. Now everyone understands what we are talking about, although maybe not the nitty gritty, not the real details, but at least they get the concept. So yeah, Core Web Vitals is everyone knows the term, the concept, etc. So it's typically always used in conversations. Yeah.
And like you said, it was introduced 5 years ago this month, or last month, in fact. So prior to that, you would certainly admit having that conversation around, loading speed, interactivity, and even sort of like stability was certainly a challenge.
Which part was the challenge?
Well, talking about the three sort of like pillars of core vitals, so loading speed,
Yeah.
stability, and interactivity, that was certainly a challenge back then.
Oh, before, yeah. Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we didn't even have CLS, for example, before Core Web Vitals came around. So, and that's an interesting part about IMP. I did hear some people, not a lot, luckily, saying we stopped playing this Google game because they keep introducing new metrics, although that didn't really happen that often. But IMP was in fact a new metric, and I typically say, yes, it is new metric, but it's finally giving us, I think in English you would say it's giving us teeth, and in Dutch we would say it's giving us end-to-end feed, as in, it's not like it was not an issue before. It was an issue before, but finally we've got eyes on it. Finally we've got data to prove that it was an issue. So if your site was laggy before, if it turns out, because of IMP, that your site is laggy, it used to be laggy before as well. But now we know where to start. And especially with, again, new APIs like the not long tasks, but the long animation frame low F API, we even get to see and do some, I typically say name and shaming, although that is not the right incentive, but we do get to see where to start. So that's really making life easier for, I would say anyone involved with the web, any web developer, site speed consultant, etc. Yeah.
And I don't seem to see any actual questions in the chat. But what I'm going to say is this: with potentially future web performance professionals who want to do some auditing, who are very interested in everything that you've talked about so far, and they want to get in touch with you, what should they do?
The easiest is my website, erwinhofman.com, or otherwise LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn as well. So yeah, one should be able to reach out to me over there as well. Yeah.
You do plan on sticking around, as you mentioned earlier. By all means, you are absolutely free to share like some links of some of the details that you sort of referenced, some writing that you've put out, blog posts, whatever it might be, and obviously your coordinates to reach out to you, etc. You're more than welcome to drop that into the chat as well. Mr. Hofman, thank you very much for your time. I'm going to remove you from the stage.
All right.
Please put your hands together for Mr. Hofman. I don't know how that works on the internet. If you want to do some clapping, I don't know, put it down in the chat, and we'll appreciate that. All right, sir.